Is there a specific way you handle things differently when there is a security issue, but that's also a public health issue?
Well, the answer is unfortunately yes. It should not be true that we would deal with public health differently when it's deemed a security issue, but because national security and international security have different resources, have different authorities, have different engagement with the public. When you view or articulate public health as a security issue, that invokes a whole set of other principles and actors into the discussion. And I actually think that's appropriate. As I said earlier, we're living through the biggest disruption that the Earth, at least the human part of the Earth, has experienced in 100 years. The economic, social, political, and informational stress that has come about from the microbiosphere should be humbling to us. And remember, security is the protection from harm, right? That includes the harm to our health. And so if we don't see the protection of our citizens as a security issue writ large, I'm not sure what could better be defined as a security issue.
Yeah, if I could jump in on that too, I think we need a lot more introspection about who defines what a security issue is for a nation. How has that come about over time, and does that itself need to change? And whose security deserves defending? What security are we trying to protect? And who's been left out of this consideration for security, and why? So in America, the authority for defining national security has traditionally been a function reserved to those holding political power. And in my experience, it hasn't really been a topic of widespread and frequent citizen participation. And if you'll recall the aftermath right after 9/11, decisions taken then did not receive a lot of public debate, and nonetheless, they did a lot to transform the national security narrative in the United States that have proven very damaging to the democratic principles and values undergirding the American experiment, and it's also had global ramifications all around the world. So, in fact, I think you can draw a straight line from that experience to the fact that security itself is a more polarized and partisan topic in the U.S. And I think, therefore, that it's not clear that we can have national security if citizens don't share a common understanding of what is factual and what is fiction. So the whole thing about disinformation comes into play here, and how does that affect our thinking about security in an age of these massive Earth system disruptions that Rod just referred to?
And if I can also talk about national security and its evolution, because it does change, and it has changed over the years. Traditionally, national security was really about nation state security, and still to this day, a lot of people, especially outside of the capitals, would think about national security as that's the thing that the military does. That's the thing that the Pentagon does. But even in the 20th century, we saw greater attention to non-state actors, economic security, and then, of course, human security. The security of the individual became a rather important piece of not just U.S. national security, but other nations and international security. And so that's a logical entry point for health security and food security and water security. And I think, people like Carol and myself think, there's still something missing from this discussion. And it has to do with how do we conceive of threats that arise that are actorless in nature, right? So-called actorless security threats. And so, for example, COVID-19 is causing tremendous disruption. But it's not something that the standard national security apparatus and even doctrine can even address. There's nothing to point a drone at. There's nothing to point, a military at, or a microphone. But they still cause harm. And so we just can't even really easily, and when I say we, I'm talking about our national architectures, our national security architectures, really can't grasp this because it's outdated. It was created for a different time. And as Carol mentioned, our Earth systems are such, we passed a discontinuity probably 10, 15 years ago. We live in a different world. Even if we don't recognize it, we live in a different world because of climate change, because of increases in infectious diseases, because of massive biodiversity loss, a whole number of issues. The world that the national security community was trained for and built for, that world is, if essentially doesn't exist in the way that they think it does. Mm-hmm. And so, we think, I'll speak for myself, I think that that national security and international security, if it's really going to protect people, the people of their nations and the globe, has to scope the threat correctly. And if you don't scope the problem, you never get the right solution.